started. Welcome again. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm Adrienne Tadella, the CAM officer here at Core Group with the TOPS program, and this is our monthly CAM task force meeting. So before we get started for this session, I'm going to go over some housekeeping rules. Since this is a participatory meeting, we are granting microphone rights. So if you haven't already done so, make sure that your microphone icon up top is turned green. All you need to do is click on it. And during presentations, please note that you need to mute your microphone so we can hear the presenter as well, and that there's no feedback among the microphones within the software. And if you are not going to use your audio for today or are having audio problems, please you go ahead and use the group chat to the bottom of your screen to write out any comments or questions that you may have, and we'll bring them up to the presenters during the Q&A. Alrighty, so I will turn it over to my colleague Genevieve Songo-Williams, who will be the lead facilitator for this event.
Great. Thanks, Adrienne, and I hope everyone can hear me well. Good morning to all our guests online, and thank you for joining us for our first KMTF meeting of 2017. And it's always really encouraging to see familiar faces online, so thanks, guys. We hope we've planned an interesting session for you, and hopefully it's a candid one, too, as we all kind of share our thoughts and experiences on learning from failure. I have the entire Core Group KM team with me in the room this morning, so we're going to do some quick self-introductions, starting with you, Sheila.
Good morning, everybody. This is Sheila. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management Specialist here at the Core Group, and I'm happy to be here. Take it away, Holly.
Hi, this is Holly Collins. I am the Communications Associate at Core Group with the TOPS program, and I'm happy to be here today as well.
Great. Thanks, team. Some technical difficulties there. Please excuse us. So as you joined the meeting, we asked you to fill in a quick poll to kind of just gauge your thoughts on learning from failure. So thank you. I think everyone's participated in that poll, and Holly will just take us very quickly through those results.
Yeah, thanks, Timothy. Looks like some interesting results here. Most of them don't have consensus on one. So our first question is, are you comfortable admitting to your peers when something has failed in your work? It looks about half of us say, yeah, we're comfortable with that, and a little over half said sometimes. Nobody said no, so that's good. But I definitely understand the sometimes. Now it's gone up to 50-50. Sometimes you're going to be comfortable with it. Sometimes you may be insecure. And so I think that's what we're going to be talking about today, some of the benefits of sharing failure. The next question is, do you think that there is fear within your organization that admitting to failure will lead to funding difficulties with donors? This is a really interesting question for us, and it seems like most of us said yes. And that, I think, is probably one of the biggest things sometimes holding us back, even when we are comfortable sharing personal failures. We don't want it to reflect on the organization if we think that if we have some fear with funding. The last one says, does your organization have a process or system in place for documenting and learning from failure? We have 70% said somewhat. One person said yes, so good for you guys over there, and 2 people said no as well. So it seems like most of us have maybe something informal, but nothing set in stone for how we deal with this, which is a really important part of KM. So I think we're all going to be able to get a lot out of this discussion today.
Great. Thanks, Holly. And I'm really looking forward to delving deeper into that final question. So looking at what other organizations have set in place for documenting and learning from failure. And we'll get to do that a bit later on. So a quick overview of the agenda. We'll start off today by hearing from April Thompson about technoserve's experiences with learning from failure. And then after that, Vidya Sriram will take us through care zone practices. And we'll have a chance to ask any questions to both our guests at the end of each of their presentations. After both presentations, we'll all work together to explore how we have individually learned from failure across our projects, across our organizations, and try and come up with a quick sort of cheat sheet or checklist of some activities or processes that we can use to make sure that we're learning from failure and improving the work that we do. We'll also have some quick updates on what we're hoping to achieve as a task force this year before we say goodbye. So let's kick off with an introduction to our first guest, April Thompson. April has more than 10 years of experience in knowledge management, marketing communications, and operations for international development organizations. She recently joined the QED group to serve as Knowledge Management Portfolio Manager for the Knowledge-Driven Agriculture Development Project, which seeks to share best practices, learning, and evidence from projects funded by USAID's Bureau of Food Security. April has worked in nearly a dozen countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America on diverse projects in health, women's empowerment, poverty alleviation, human rights, and natural resources management. Thank you so much for joining us today, April. Over to you.
Thank you, Yamasi, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. I'd also like to thank TechnoServe for letting me share these experiences with you. TechnoServe generally strives to be a learning organization, but its journey into learning from failure, I think, really came from a few champions of the idea who worked to push this forward. And one of those was the co-organizer of our annual leadership meeting, which brought together the organization's leaders from around the world to exchange learnings and celebrate successes. A few years back, we decided to make failure one of the themes of the meeting. And so for this first intentional foray into embracing failure, we invited a professional failure, George Roeder, who's the CEO of Engineers Without Borders, to really model for us how this could be gracefully approached within an organization. So Engineers Without Borders puts together this annual publicly available failure report where staff from all levels of the organization share their own tales of failure and what they learned from them. With this deck, we can share it later. There's actually a link to one of the reports, but I think you can also find them easily available online. So George gave a really inspiring plenary address, which we followed with some exercises with people sharing their own failures on Post-its and creating basically a wall of failure in our meeting space. We also lined up some case studies of failure the following day. And when we got back the evaluations from this 3-day meeting, we were actually surprised to find that the failure forum, as we call it, was the biggest success of the meeting. Finding that people were really relieved to talk about failure and, in fact, really wanted to do more of that. So the following year, we did a similar exchange on the same theme, this time breaking out into small groups where people could exchange on similar kinds of failures in a more intimate setting. By the third go-around, we want to mix it up a little bit and not just look at failure in the rearview mirror, but also to talk about real-life problems and see if we could come together to find potential course corrections to keep an issue from veering off into a failure. So these freak-out forums, as we call them, were really fun sessions. We used different problem-solving methods to structure them towards potential solutions. So for me, there were a few interesting takeaways from the sessions themselves. First, I think there was real value in the prep work. People often came with these complex, heated issues, but after talking through them, sometimes realized that the epicenter of their problem really wasn't what they thought it was, and that they really gained something just from kind of talking through their problem with someone. It's also really important to scope out these sessions in a way that they were specific enough that we could actually land at some good ideas without it becoming a free-for-all that didn't actually yield a helpful solution or potential solution. And so that this wasn't just something we did once a year for show. We started offering this as a service of our knowledge management unit and did some remotely facilitated sessions where staff presented issues via video and then selected practice groups were invited to provide feedback. So I think one of my observations from this, though, is that I think people have the same hesitancy to talk about their problems as they do their failures. Everybody wants their colleagues to think, oh, I've got this, and asking for help can be perceived as a sign of weakness. really a few failure or freak-out forums is going to change mentalities overnight, but I think having some brave souls come out and share their problems and failures, we were able to start to benefit, or rather to model the benefits for others. I think also, when you're working in a remote environments where people are often siloed, it models for our far-flung colleagues that we were all willing to show up for one another and that we weren't alone in the trenches with these problems. Everyone faced similar issues, and that actually their colleagues were really happy to help. So I guess just some general observations on this process. Cultural shifts don't happen overnight in an organization. Most of us, I think, grew up in a culture where if you got a failing mark on your report card, you better hide it under the bed or face punishment. It really takes time to sort of unlearn those attitudes about failures and feel safe in the organization to share them out. So to that end, I think it's important that leaders in an organization help set the tone by acknowledging their own failures in a genuine and transparent way. It also helps to look for low-stakes ways that we could talk about failure and get people comfortable with the idea. So for example, I had a webinar series on programmatic learnings, and often people would come with a presentation about how great everything turned out with the project and list all their successes. So I would encourage teams to talk about not just what worked, but also what didn't work, because I think they are equally valuable. And I think in terms of sharing learning, it's also really helpful for people to see the route that someone took to success, because often they try many things before finding what works, and it can be valuable to see how someone actually arrived at a given result rather than just the result itself. Lastly, I think, and we saw this with the poll, there's a real hesitation to talk about failure externally. No one really wants to air dirty laundry to the donor. So I think, again, there are some safe ways that we can do this. Just a small example in a donor report. You can talk about problems or missteps the project may have, but chase it with a plan to rectify them and show that you are addressing that. And I think donors appreciate that. Everyone understands that development is hard, and any entrepreneur will tell you that they had many failures before arriving at V1. So just last thought too, really, I think one of the best things we can do is try to reframe the idea of failure itself. Not just to accept that failure is an inevitable part of being human, but to think of failures as indications that you aren't just going for the safe solutions that you know have worked in the past, but stretching your boundaries to achieve greater things. And I also think it's important to stay focused on why we talk about failure, or else it can devolve into a therapy session or a confessional. It's not about sharing failure for failure's sake, but to really pull apart and see what we can learn from it for the next time. And obviously, for the kinds of intractable problems that we face in development, there will be a lot of next times. And it's important, I think, not to get discouraged by our failures, but rather to look at it like Edison in his lab, who had, apparently thousands of attempts before he got to the light bulb, which is today our symbol of bright new ideas we all hope to find in our work. So with that, I'll leave you with this little sheepdoggy failure, and if we have some time for questions.
Great, thanks, April. I love the Edison quote. Very encouraging. Do we have any questions for April? I think whilst we are thinking through those, I'd like to start. Tell us a little bit more about the failure champions, April. So those team members who can help make sure that learning from failure is on an organization's agenda, and who I think can also work towards creating that safe space for people to do so. How did this work? Was it, was it a designated role? Was it incorporated into other roles? How did that unfold?
Sure. Well, I guess the key failure champion, as I called it, was really my manager, who oversaw our department of learning measurement and capacity building, and I think just really put it in front and center of that kind of work, and I think that's a good place for it. I think, as with knowledge management, you find champions everywhere, and I think I think having something like this leadership meeting and putting it on everyone's agenda was a great place to start. And then, hopefully that did filter down to the country and program level. And as I said, I think, finding ways, not just to do this once a year and talk about it in a leadership space, but, to make sure that there are people that are carrying the ball forward. And at the same time, you can't force it. I think it really has to be genuine and something that people want to embrace.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I see multiple attendees are typing quite furiously. Please remember that you can also use your mic. It's a very small group of us today, so everyone has mic rights, right? So please just go ahead and speak to us. We'd love to hear you. Okay. So April, there's a question from Lynette. Could you give some examples of what has emerged from the various failure activities?
Well, I think the iteration during the freak-out forums, for example, was something where there were some real tangible results, and people actually got some great ideas for some of their issues. And I think also just from a KM perspective to, again, people working on similar problems in, various contexts across the organization were able to kind of identify one another, as working on that issue and kind of really reinforce that peer-to-peer network.
Great, thank you. And that's a really good point, Sheila, actually, that you really can't force people to share failure or kind of publicize it as well. I think we're all very sensitive, not just even to the donors, but also to our competitors of being seen as not meeting our objectives. So there is some work to be done around there.
Or to our colleagues.
Yes, and that too. So I see Julie and Ellen are typing. We'll just give them a second. I really like your comment as well, April, on the role of sort of organizational culture and how that unfolds in acknowledging failure and kind of using it as an opportunity to learn or to innovate, And I think you've shared some really good tips that we as KM professionals can start to think through to start up these conversations within our organizations and to begin to reframe failure, as you suggest, in a way that's positive and in a way that's meaningful for our organizations. And there's a question from Ellen. You mentioned offering the service of remotely facilitating services. Could you speak to what that looks like?
Sure. So again, this was in part with what we call the freak-out forums, followed up with participants and then widen the lens to all of our project managers and certain practice groups, and just let them know, hey, this is a service that we're willing to offer. If you've got an issue that you think can be workshopped, to come to us. And we did have a number of folks that stepped forward. And we tried a few different things. It is a little challenging given, the various time zones that we worked across. There really wasn't one good time to bring everyone together on a call. So what we ended up doing was, we create a web page for that particular issue. We'd have the person who wanted to workshop an issue to do a really quick video on their iPhone, just 2 minutes explaining their problem, had a transcript of that we put up on the page, and then invited people we kind of put together different listservs of people that we thought could potentially weigh in on this to respond via email. And then it was all kind of in one thread so people could maybe build on something that someone else said, and then we had, so we had that open for a given period of time, maybe 3-4 days, and then had, kind of let ideas filter through, and then had the problem haver at the end kind of summarize for them what they took away from it and what they plan to do with it. I think that's important too, that when you're, inviting busy people in to, provide feedback, that they also kind of get something back and, get a sense that what they have provided was useful and maybe follow up later to see what came.
Hello, April?
Yes.
Okay, lost you for a second. Okay, thank you. So there's a question from Laura, and that builds up from Sheila's comment as well. And I think you've touched on some of this. So what are some examples you've used at TNG to facilitate positive dialogue about failure? Do you use any specific facilitation techniques?
And I should clarify, this is my second day with KDAD, so I've not really engaged with TNG, but in terms of specific facilitation techniques.
And that's all right, April. We'll give you some time to get acclimatized, and we'll have you back on to share those. How about that? There's a question from Julie. Most outcomes can't be divided into 100% success or 100% failure. Highly successful activities have elements of failure and vice versa. Thus, I'm having trouble defining failure. What counts? How is a failure different from a lesson learned? Are little personal failures worth capturing? So, oops, I neglected to reply to an important email. Or are we mostly talking about larger project, organization, team level failures? And I think that's something we can throw out to everyone.
Well, those are great questions, and I think you can have a lot of failures without necessarily the lessons learned, and I think part of intentionally talking about failure is to draw out, the lessons, and again, like I said, a debrief to kind of see what did go wrong here. Otherwise, you're just destined to do the same thing again and again. And we all, every day, make, small mistakes, but I think, you kind of know it, in terms of a failure with a capital F. When something has really gone south, I think it is kind of a larger failure, but I think, it really does a bit depend on how you want to scope it out and sort of what's the context for talking about it. Another just last thing also in terms of one of the things I think was a success coming out of this, and in terms of offering to facilitate services. So there were a few times where colleagues at headquarters who had worked on cross-functional projects came and said, what, we want to have a debrief and we want to have someone there to sort of facilitate this conversation that wasn't involved. I think that could be useful to have somebody who who can really take a step back and really look at something that happened. It can often be emotionally charged, and I think also it can help to let things sit for a while and not if some project just came to an end and you may need some time to reflect on it, take the steam off, as it were.
Okay. Great, thanks, April. Ellen's typing, and I really loved how the kind of failure forum evolved into this kind of more practical, peer-assisted breakout forum, and I think you make a very important point, both Sheila and April, that people need to feel that they're getting something when they admit to having failed or to having had challenges. So that kind of practical guidance that they received during the freakout forums, I think is, very actionable and something that we could all think about. So we really do have to move on. Julie, Ellen, you're typing. Please go ahead. We will get back to these questions later. But for now, thank you all for your really great questions, and I'd like to move on to our next guest. Vidya Sriram has been with CARE since 2008, and she's served in various capacities, including in new business development, supporting CARE country offices responding to U.S. government competitive procurement. She led the development of some of CARE's most prominent programs, including several of the organization's largest Food for Peace Title II programs. She recently became the Senior Technical Advisor for Research within the Food and Nutrition Security Unit and focused on generating evidence of CARE's impact in its food and nutrition programming. Vidya, thank you. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I was really pleased that Yancy and April, Yancy asked me to do this because this has been an initiative that has been for about 8 years now. And as most of you
Vidya, I'm so sorry. You're cutting out a bit.
Oh, okay. Let me do my best. Can you hear me now?
That is much better.
Hello?
Thank you.
Okay. I literally have to put the laptop in my mouth. Okay. So we get about a third of our funding from the U.S. government. So it's a significant portion of. So we thought.
Vidya, we keep losing you.
And we embarked on what's called Why We. Yes? Oh no.
Headset? You seem to be cutting in and out.
I'm not using a headset. I'm just on my laptop. And fix my speakers.
Do you have one close to hand?
If I turn the speakers down, does it get better or worse? Can anyone hear me?
Seem a bit better now.
Okay, I'll be really still and we'll try. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sorry guys about the sound issues. I'll do my best. Okay. So starting in 2008, we started a process called Why We Lose. Does it sound okay right now? Can you hear me? Hello? Oh dear.
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Just raise your hand or pipe up if I go out. No, no.
Okay.
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we call what this analysis is, we call it Why We Lose. We couldn't think of a better name, so it's stuck, and it's the best we can do. But so any given year, we win about 35 to 45% of the proposals that we've met, which isn't bad. But given that this is the bulk of our funding, we wanted to get better at it. And given that each year U.S. government funding is more and more competitive, we thought it best to analyze what we're doing well and, more importantly, what we're not doing well so that we can get better. Because when we do it convincingly, the donor gives us money, but when we lose, we have to shut down good programs, fire staff that work on those programs, scale back how many people we serve in a given country. This is a lot of pressure for new business people. So if you see a new business person today, go hug them. They have a lot on their heads. So in order for us to all sleep better at night, we decided to go about figuring out how to fix this. So where we started, for those of you that work on U.S. government proposals, you're familiar with the loss letter. And on the right here, this is an example of a loss letter. It's disheartening to get one of these, but when you do and it has a lot of detail in it about why you lost, sometimes technical evaluation committees are really sensitive and they send you really detailed feedback letters about, you know, why your technical approach wasn't appropriate or why your cost application wasn't the most competitive. And these things are really valuable to get, but we don't get them that often. And when we don't get them, we ask for a full debrief from USAID. And about 50% of the time we will have an in-person or on the phone call with USAID, with the Technical Evaluation Committee, to go through why we did not win. So they'll go through every single section of the application, and this kind of feedback is really invaluable for a new business shop when they're trying to figure out, you know, why is it that this proposal we put our heart and soul into, why did it not win? And now why do we have to go tell our country office they have to fire everybody? It's a tough thing. In addition to that, we also started instituting a process called the After Action Review. And it was just a basic survey that we started on SurveyMonkey. It had about 60 questions, which is a lot, I know. But we sent it to key stakeholders who worked on the proposal. So the technical staff, the country office staff, maybe even the consultant, anybody who was very intimately involved in the design of the program. And we asked them a number of questions, everything from, you know, how were partnerships formed, how far in advance did you start working on the program, how effective do you think the cost application was, just it ran the gamut. And what we did was we triangulated across these things, so the loss letters, the debriefs, the after action reviews, and like any good nerds, we put it into a spreadsheet. And I'm not a statistician, so I'm not going to act like this is hugely scientific, but it kind of gave us a sense of here are the broad themes for why we are failing, and then also divided that into smaller things. So for example, if USAID said your technical strategy is weak, generally they'll give you a couple reasons for why that is. You know, it's not integrated, it's not sustainable, whatever. And so we put it all into the spreadsheet, kind of analyzed the results, and came up with, okay, here are the broad themes for why we are not doing so well. And then what we found, we digested, put into, you know, some summary tables, and analyzed it and put it into a document, a Word document that kind of went through, here are the major reasons why CARE's technical proposals or cost applications are not successful. And this is illustrative, so, you know, this isn't telling you too much about CARE, but just in a broad sense, this is probably why a lot of organizations lose competitive proposals. You know, your management structure isn't appropriate, or your partnerships aren't the right ones, whatever it is. And so we went through that and kind of saw year to year, okay, here are some patterns in why we're not doing very well. We need to get better at streamlining our approach. We need to integrate across sectors. And, you know, that all matters inside the new business development shop. But we also figured it'd be a good thing to tell other people about this. So who did we tell? We basically told everyone we work with. We're lucky enough at CARE that people aren't scared of failure. So even though the new business shop has a lot on it, we have a lot of proposals to win so that CARE can keep doing what it does. It wasn't like we were being blamed when something went wrong. Everybody acknowledged that there are 1,000 reasons why your technical proposal didn't make it to the next round, or you were rejected by USAID at BAFA, whatever it was. So we felt like it was a safe zone to tell everybody and share the results of our work. So we were very honest about it, and I wrote a paper every 2 years sort of summarizing the results of our analysis. It was like a 10 to 15-page paper that laid out in detail what we could do better, basically. And presenting the raw data and kind of an analysis of here are the themes, here's what we see from the after action reviews, and the debriefs for what we could have done better, and here are the steps that we should take to do better next time. And so we sent it to anyone who had a stake in wanting to know how we could do USG competitive bidding better. And that included the executive management team. So we sent it to everyone from the CEO down to, you know, program level staff in country offices. And I'm not saying everyone read it. I'm not even saying most people read it, but a lot of people who did read it found it very meaningful, and some very key stakeholders, including the EMT, that kind of stumbled on this report, said, okay, you know what, we want to up our investment in your unit so that you can start doing better and give you the resources that you need to make some of this better and make your U.S. government proposal development process better. So what we did was we sort of changed the way we approached our business. We, number one, started seeing it as a business because essentially that is what it is. We're competing with all kinds of organizations that are really, really great at what they do. And so we instituted an 18-month process for proposal development, got all of our stakeholders in line. Everybody had, you know, a role and a timeline and a process to follow. And I'm not saying this happened overnight. This was years in the making. So, you know, to April's point, cultural shifts take time. It didn't happen overnight. It took, I'd say, at least 5 or 6 years for us to get to where we are now. But what I notice is happening is that every year we're able to pursue more U.S. government funding because our processes are getting better. Our understanding of our own weaknesses is better, so we're able to mitigate that right at the beginning. We still have a long way to go, but we're making headway. And so, for instance, in 2008, when I joined CARE, we applied for, I think, $80 million in funding annually. And now in 2017, we're up to $500 million. And this isn't all because of, you know, our understanding of failure. A lot of it has to do with funding trends, and we're now pursuing DFAPs and all of that. But the point is, we've consistently tried to get better by understanding our failure, and that's helped us sort of, you know, get remarkably better in 8 years. So that's, I'll stop there if anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Vidya. Absolutely, we have some for you. Cheryl would like to know, were AAR surveys done only for losses?
No, AARs are done for wins and losses. So that's one thing, it's actually a really good point. So in addition to understanding our losses, we also, in our debriefs, they give you a summary of what your strengths are. And so our AARs are also asking about what we do well so that we can keep doing those things as well. So there's a section in the Why We Lose paper about what it is within each major category of issue that we do really well and that we should continue doing.
Thank you. Ellen would like to know how much analysis is done by proposal versus annually?
We do it by proposal. So every year we submit 75 proposals. And if we get loss letters or debriefs on, you know, 50 to 75% of them, that's huge. Usually it's less than that. But we do it on a biannual basis. So every 2 years we compile this analysis so that we have a big enough stock of debriefs for it to be sort of statistically useful.
Right. Okay, so I think Sheila's question follows up from that. How often are the failure analysis documents reviewed within CARE? So do you look at them at the beginning of each bidding or proposal process?
We do this process, like I said, on a biannual basis, but we send out this summary of the process, this Why We Lose paper, any chance we get. So any new country office that's applying for U.S. government bid will say, hey, here's the opportunity, here's the RFA, and by the way, here's this analysis of what we don't do well, just in case you're interested in reading it. Because it is also about kind of building a culture of learning and learning about failure. And people's inboxes are so inundated all the time that you just kind of have to keep slamming them with it, and at some point they'll run across it.
Yeah. Right. So, and then Cheryl asks, what communication channels do you use to reach international staff? How do you get them to engage with this report?
So our initial touch point is when I did this analysis, we send out a big email blast and shoot it out with that email. But we'd also include it in our quarterly newsletter. The CEO's office sends out a monthly newsletter, an e-blast, so we've included in that. I used to have a series of webinars for each region. So our regions like Latin America, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East have regional management units, and they have monthly meetings, and I would present sort of the summary findings at one of these monthly meetings for each. And, you know, put it on the intranet. There's any chance we get to kind of foster the world with this report, we took it.
Right. Okay. And Laura also makes a very great point that this is a really helpful approach to learn about, and it can also be used to help understand what types of professional development would be beneficial to staff and to the organization as well. So thank you for that, Laura. Please keep the questions coming, everyone. Vidya and April are going to stay with us till the end of this. But for now, let's try and have a little fun. For the next 15-20 minutes, we'll like to talk about some of the failures that we have had in our work and the kind of techniques that we've used to, first of all, identify these failures and then learn from them to strengthen our results and to innovate in the work that we do. I think we do have enough participants for about 2 groups of discussion. So we're going to use the breakout rooms in Adobe Connect, and Adrienne is going to tell us a little bit about how that works, and she's also going to drop each participant into a discussion room. You'll have either Vidya or April in one of those rooms to kind of just take you through the discussion questions and make sure that you're getting along well. And Adrienne, Sheila, and I will also hop around between the rooms to make sure everything's okay. Please do choose someone to document your group's conversations. You should have an on-screen notepad in each room that you can just type into. And then we can all just share these nuggets when we get back together in about 15 minutes. So I'll hand it over to you, Adrienne. Thanks, Yamasi. So as Yamasi has said, drop randomly our attendees today into breakout groups. One will be led by April, the other one will be led by Vidya, and
Yamasi, Sheila, and Holly and I will be dropping in and out between these 2 groups. So breakout groups on Adobe Connect mimics what small group activities are in person. So you can use the group chat, and you will only see the answers and comments typed in that group chat separately from the other group. You can also use your mic for this portion of the meeting. Once again, please just check if your mic icon is green and turned on. And if you are experiencing any problems, again, we'll be dropping in and out and helping you solve it. Alrighty. So, and yep, Yamasi just wants to remind everyone that please choose someone to jot down your thoughts on the notepad in each group. All right, let's go ahead and start our breakouts, and we will reconvene in 15 minutes. I'm going to drop.
Great. So we all back together? Yes, we are. Each group seems to have had some really interesting discussions. So shall we start with April's group? Would someone like to kind of just summarize that for us and share some main points?
Okay, I guess I just got nominated. This is Ellen.
Thank you.
So we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the first question, and now I can't even remember who shared it. It might have been Sheila, was talking about they had a project, it was a contract where they were using a social media tool, which was a wiki, and the challenge was they found that the wiki wasn't really working in the way that they had hoped or desired, but it was mandated to be used. So, she was really trying to focus on, well, we have to use this. So even though it was somewhat hard for the team, she kind of found some other ways to energize them, then also looked at, since we have to use this tool, how do we make progress in ways that we can leverage the tool for the project. So, she just kind of shared that example. And then as we kind of talked about failure and, how we look at that within projects or programs or organizations and activities and around discovering it or learning from it, we kind of talked about using the after action kind of reviews at end of projects to look at as a way to frame that up, to look at both what worked and what didn't. So kind of both sides of that coin and how to leverage that. Another example around work planning, and then looking at what had failed. So kind of that pre-mortem, and kind of thinking back from other projects, and then leveraging that into, how do we think about that for work planning in this project. So we also talked about how that was a great opportunity for new staff to learn from kind of past projects, past failures, past experiences. And then there was a comment around, after action reviews are really important, not just at the end of the project, but at different points over the life of the project as well. That it can be really helpful to get management response support on those reviews. And then we kind of shifted a little bit and talked about having kind of the right people in the room. Making sure the whole team is there and able to participate, because if it's just sometimes a subsection, you might not be getting the full or all perspectives on what went wrong and also what went right. So it's really important to have kind of that full team perspective. However, we also recognize that sometimes when you have the smaller core team, you can dive deeper into the understanding of what happened and get better insight, because you can sometimes go deeper with a smaller group. We talked about then resistance to talk about failure. So kind of why might people be resistant to it? But then we also said, okay, but how do you make it not a therapy session, or how do you make it so people aren't taking things personally? And then various people shared around trying to take the focus off a person or what a person did or didn't do, but look at more the situation or the process and really focus on the why and what happened. Sometimes having a bit of time pass, if that's possible, so that people can kind of put things in perspective and really be able and ready to come back and reflect on the failure. That it's not about placing blame. And sometimes people are less willing to talk about the failure when they've been successful. So kind of it was like thinking about winning that project or winning that proposal, and focusing, well, it worked. So do we really need to think about what was messy or what didn't work well because the outcome was there? So, taking the time to maybe think about, again, both sides of the coin of getting to that success. And then the last couple kind of points there around celebrating success is really to have a healthy culture for your organization, and really maybe be able to focus on embracing the failures. You also have to celebrate the success. So spending time on that if you only, like as supervisors, only focus on what's going wrong or on the failures, then it's a bit perhaps demoralizing. So you also need to focus just as much on the success so that you can have that balance. And then, we kind of wrapped up talking about other ways or tools to talk about failures, often starting out by having the person or the leader talk about admitting their own failure first, that it's a way to get that conversation rolling, really helping people understand that it's safe, that it kind of is putting that out there. And then from that culture standpoint, just for the whole organization, to have the management or the boss be that leader as the example, and that we just were recognizing that people often take their cues from their boss or their supervisors, and so how do you make it safe for teams? So hopefully the team that I was with at my small group will use the chat if I missed anything that was important.
Yeah, thank you for that summary, Ellen. Does anyone else have anything to add to that discussion? I think it's interesting that you spoke about kind of having the right people in the room, because this came up with our group as well. And sometimes that's part of the problem, when you don't have the right stakeholders in the room when you're implementing or when you're going through the activities. That can be the cause of the failure. So that was interesting to see that it showed up in this group as well. Thank you. Should we move on to Vidya's group? Great. So who's going to summarize this discussion for us? And I feel really bad because I think Scott and Laura don't have any.
No, I was volunteering Lynette to cheat notes.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I looked back for the notes. I was just kind of writing things down. Yeah, we had a little bit of a challenge with audio, so we did a lot of our discussion back and forth with the chat. But I think Yemisi already brought up one of the points that came up related to the people in the conversation to begin with. One of the first examples that was shared was about a CAM hub, and felt like some of the challenges were that the scope was very large and they were unable to meet the needs. And then the team learned later that they needed to kind of have clear objectives, pare down and be very specific. There were also some challenges related to senior leadership buy-in and the users being involved. I think across the board, a lot of examples came out that people felt like it was easier within their own team to talk about things, but across teams was a lot more difficult, and that those systems were not really in place as much. And then there's also a question about kind of the technology. As you can see in here, a lot of this is just kind of copied in from the chat. So partly because people thought it was a good idea, and partly with the chat and the audio, one of the big outcomes of this discussion was the suggestion for a failure happy hour, that both the failure and the happy hour part would go together well and continue the discussion. And then on some of the... Yeah, thanks. Did you want to add something, Yemisi? Just anticipating the happy hour. And then on some of the ways that people talk about failure, Yemisi talked about core feeling very internally open after action reviews, after every event, talking about what's going well, what the challenges were, from that developing guidance and checklists that could then inform future events. But across the board, people are expressing concern about across teams, it's more challenging or it's avoided. And then there's the Failing Forward series with quarterly meetings to share examples of failure, why things failed, what could be done differently. And then we went into a discussion around if we have solutions, then is it a failure, and whether things are a dead-end failure, kind of a discussion in the chat room related to how do you define failures. So I hope anybody else could please add to that summary. I think that was a great summary, Lynette. Thank you. Does anyone else from that group have anything to add to that? Okay, so thank you, everyone. I think there were really some very clear sort of points for action that we spoke about in these discussions. And what we're going to do is put all these together and just share them when we share the resources, because I think they're quick and easy tips that can help us to begin or continue these conversations within our organizations about identifying and learning from failure. So April and Vidya, many, many, many thanks for your time today. We're so grateful for the insights that you've shared and also for facilitating those two breakout groups and showing us how we can use sort of failure as a valuable tool to improve development programming. And we hope that this is the first of many visits from both of you. So moving on now, Sheila is going to talk a little bit to us about some of the plans for the Knowledge Management Task Force in 2017. Sheila?
Thank you, Yamasi. And thank you everybody for attending today. And I think especially for sharing not an easy topic to talk about. Just wanted to let you know about a couple of things that are happening, the KM Task Force that we're working on for you. First of all, we're starting a KM Task Force newsletter. The first issue of that is going to go out February 15th, so a nice kind of post-Valentine's Day gift for everybody. And we'll be doing this every other month. So we hope you enjoy it. This was really done kind of for us. You know, we need a newsletter for us. So please take advantage of it, read it. You know, you have any more content suggestions or anything, let us know. So we're really excited about that. Also, Lynette Friedman, some of you know, she did a wonderful job developing a learning agenda workshop for us. And now she's going to be putting together a learning agenda workbook. And so this is kind of to complement the workshop, but also it's going to be done in such a way that those of you who weren't able to get to the workshop still have a tool to help you develop a learning agenda. And last but not least, I'm sure Yemisi will take let you know about this, but check out the discussion forums for the Knowledge Management Task Force. Emily Janik, member Emily Janik, a couple of weeks ago put out a great post on what you look for in a knowledge manager. And I think those of you who are in a hiring position or trying to do your resume or whatever, it's been a really interesting discussion. I'd like to see if you guys have any more types of information, tips on what you could do for there. As you know, we are in a very ill-to-field find, so writing up job descriptions can be that much more challenging. And then also, I think Yemisi will be talking about, we will be doing one for failure. So please, please, please keep the questions coming. And Ellen asked a very interesting question at the end of our breakout, which we didn't quite get to, is, you know, the whole idea about using the word failure. Is it too negative? You know, should we desensitize the word? What should we do around that? So that might be very interesting. If we could get April maybe to, you know, write up a little bit of something, then, you know, Vidya and everybody else to pitch in. You know, if the word failure is too ugly, you know, what do you do, or should you just own the word? But otherwise, thank you again, and I'll turn it over to Yemisi.
Thank you, Sheila. And I think that's it for us on this end. Do we have any last thoughts and comments from our members online at all? So Lynette's typing something. Oh, great. Thank you, Lynette. And a huge thank you to all of you. We really do appreciate your time and the participation at these meetings. If there's ever any topic you want to discuss, ever any experiences that you'd like to share out to the wider community, please let us know, and we'd be happy to arrange it via these knowledge management meetings. As usual, our meeting notes, a copy of the recording, and any resources that we've mentioned today will be posted on the FSN Network website. There's a link to the Knowledge Management Task Force page on your screens. If you haven't formally done so, please go ahead and join. And we'll send the link out to today's meeting as soon as it's ready. We also encourage you to continue this conversation and this peer exchange in our online forum, and you have that link on your screens now. We'll also include that in the follow-up email. Thanks once again for joining us today. We hope to see you all at our next meeting, and we'll share those details with you soon. Bye for now.